I miss Twisted Metal. It's a series I loved growing up, and with the last installment coming out over 10 years ago in 2012, and with Sony's unwillingness to make classic games more readily available, it honestly left my mind for longer than I care to admit. I can't really say I'm surprised about the series' disappearance. Car combat has always been a genre that's a niche within a niche, so much so that the genre might as well just be Twisted Metal. Sure, Vigilante 8 and Rogue Trip are a thing, but they aren't what you think of when you think of car combat. If you think of car combat at all, they just aren't Twisted Metal. With all that in mind, I was very surprised to see Sony greenlight a release for a Twisted Metal TV series so long after the franchise's last outing. I had no expectations for the show, yet I ended up enjoying my time with it. It really feels like it was made by fans who actually get it, and it made me realize just how much I missed the series. So naturally, I started replaying a bunch of the games, watching other YouTube videos talking about them, and wondering if there's a chance of the series making a comeback. You see, Twisted Metal is a lot like Bloodborne 2, in the sense that every now and then there are rumors of a new game popping up, but they never amount to anything. But with the new show out and doing well, I can't help but wonder about a new Twisted Metal in the modern generation of gaming. How would it be handled? What would you keep and what would you need to change to match the current needs of audiences? Is there a way to reach a broader audience than the current die-hard fan base? I can't give any solid answers, but I do like theorizing game ideas, so let's talk about it. If you're completely new to the series, Twisted Metal is a car combat game. Basically, a demolition derby that makes the use of guns, missiles, chainsaws, anything that makes blowing up the competition easier. The story goes that every year a mysterious man named Calypso hosts the Twisted Metal tournament, and the prize for winning the contest is one wish. No limit on size, price, or even reality. Your heart's greatest desire. A simple setup, but effective to justify the madness and carnage of the contest. Most of the series used deathmatch as the primary game mode, with other side modes here and there, but never the main focus. Story was second to gameplay, hence the simple setup and the fact that the cars were considered the characters more so than the drivers, and it never really reached widespread popularity outside the US. So what can we do with this? Well, when watching the Twisted Metal retrospective from The Golden Bolt, fantastic video and YouTuber in general, link to the video is in the description, you should really watch it. He said something I had never really considered before when he likened the series to a hero shooter, and he's absolutely right. Every vehicle having different stats, special abilities, and utilities really does make for a hero shooter in cars, and that's further compounded in TM 2012, when team-based multiplayer was a bigger focus and some vehicles even had support abilities. I think a modern Twisted Metal should lean into this. Hero shooters are still a fairly new genre capable of generating a lot of popularity, and let's be real, Twisted Metal can never get rid of the vehicles having unique stats and abilities, so it's kinda stuck either riding that edge or committing fully. And a hero shooter in cars is just the right amount of different to help it stand out from the competition. So, since hero shooters tend to favor team-oriented gameplay, how do we better emphasize team play for Twisted Metal? Well, like I said earlier, TM 2012 put more focus on team play with new modes. Obviously, Team Deathmatch in addition to regular Deathmatch, as well as the Capture the Flag-esque nuke mode. Additionally, you could include a King of the Hill mode, a Battle Royale-esque shrinking arena, or an escort mode. Imagine a train that needs to reach its destination at the end of a long track, with one team defending the train as the other attacks it. But modes are only part of the equation when you need heroes, or in this case the vehicles, to interact with each other as a team. Before we get too far into that, I want to preface that I do want to keep classic Twisted Metal free-for-alls as a mode, with team modes being an option, so the vehicles have to be built for both classic and team modes. Again, I think TM 2012 handled this really well when, for the first time in the series, every vehicle had two special weapons, and in some cases, one of those specials was team-oriented support. I think Junkyard Dog, the tow truck, best emphasizes this with Special Number 1 having a taxicab spawn on your hook to be launched like a trebuchet into enemies for a good chunk of damage, and then Special Number 2 spawning a healing taxicab that could be given to allies to restore health, making Junkyard Dog the pseudo-medic of the game. One special works well for solo play, the other helps with team play. If this design process could be applied to the rest of the vehicles on the roster, you'd inherently put a better focus on team modes. Healing is a very obvious one, but there's other means of support you could give your team. Picture Outlaw's classic Taser special, only an alternate version where instead of electrocuting enemies, you provide an electric shield to allies to block damage. Or Mr. Slam picking up an ally into the bucket, tanking any damage for them, and letting the ally shoot their most powerful weapons from an elevated position. Maybe even throwing the ally to safety if they're low on health. Or have Manslaughter open the back of the dump truck to create a ramp that lets allies vault over enemies for better positioning. Of course, some vehicles would be pure DPS to tear through enemy teams, but giving players a way to support each other and encourage team play would only help the franchise fit more neatly into the hero shooter genre. Additionally, I would propose giving vehicles some regenerating normal weapons. Classically, in Twisted Metal, only your special weapon would regenerate, and everything else would come from pickups across the battlefield. This works well enough, though there are instances where running out of weapons means you have to disengage and restock, and it would hurt team play to have a teammate suddenly disappear on you because they ran out of damage dealers. I'd suggest giving each vehicle 1 or 2 normal weapons that regenerate like a special, though much faster, so disengagements are less frequent, and to help encourage certain playstyles. Take Mr. Grimm, for example. Traditionally, his special is an incredibly hard-hitting weapon that travels in a straight line, making it harder to land, but with his fast speed and low armor, he makes for a solid glass cannon with a hit-and-run style. If we give Mr. Grimm regenerating power missiles and the satellite missiles from Black, his core gameplay style would stay largely the same. Players would still be throwing out high-damage weapons with hit-and-run gameplay, and the constant stream of hard-to-aim, straight-shot weapons would be decent practice for the special that handles the same. A similarly lightly armored vehicle could be something like the ATV from Head On, trading a bit of speed for handling, and with regenerating remote bombs and ricochet bombs, it would make for an ambush character that sets up damage before the enemy gets to the fight. Giving the right vehicle the right regenerating weapons could allow players to build different team compositions to suit their current scenario. I personally enjoy the tankier vehicles in Twisted Metal, and with this system there would be more tangible differences for choosing between Sweet Tooth and Darkside, depending on what would work for my team. And it's worth noting that these regenerating weapons wouldn't throw off solo play either. The vehicles would still have their usual strengths and weaknesses, just now with less downtime when needing to refill your armory. And if they did pose that big of a problem, they could easily be toggled off for a more classic Twisted Metal playstyle. So more team-oriented modes, vehicles that have support abilities, and regenerative weapons that don't force team members to break away from engagements all lend themselves really well to the hero shooter formula without breaking classic Twisted Metal too much. Of course, that's not the full story though. Twisted Metal's gameplay-first design philosophy works well and makes for some kick-ass games, but the market has changed and stories are much more important to a game than they were back in 1995. And if launch Overwatch has taught me anything, it's that people who play hero shooters really like their heroes. There's not much I can say here. I'm not going to give you an entire Twisted Metal fanfic, and simply telling the hypothetical game devs to write a good story is worthless. The best I can say is pull from Twisted Metal Black. Give characters multiple cutscenes to elaborate on their desires and really emphasize what would drive someone to compete in a blood sport like this. I said that the tournament to compete for a wish is a simple setup, and it is, but it does lend itself really well to writers coming up with ideas for characters desperate or insane enough to compete. I have confidence that a good group of writers could use that setup to create a roster of solid, interesting drivers. Additionally, if you created some overarching story outside of the tournament, players would get to see more of the drivers interacting with each other and set up some good moments of characterization. but that's getting close to fanfic territory again, and I don't want to go there. As for the overall style of the game, I'd want to go close to Twisted Metal 2 with its world tour aspect. Exotic locales can help give us more unique battlegrounds, and a world tour could introduce drivers from across the globe for better representation. Twisted Metal has always been a very American series. It doesn't see a lot of popularity overseas. I'm not naive enough to think that adding in characters from other countries is enough to broaden the game's popularity, but I will tell you that ever since I got into Street Fighter, I was constantly wondering when they were finally going to add a Canadian World Warrior. So representation means something at the very least, and drivers coming from different walks of life just allow for more opportunities to write interesting stories for people to latch onto. Maybe you could try to match the apocalypse presented in the show for better brand synergy, but Twisted Metal has always been an anthology, so the similarities wouldn't mean much. Maybe building up stories with different factions would better help play up the team-oriented aspect, but that would be fluff. Like I said, I don't want to give you a full Twisted Metal fanfiction, but I know there's a way to have these weird, very unstable drivers build up some popularity from the fanbase, even if I can't easily summarize exactly how. One last thing I want to touch on is longevity. If the focus is online multiplayer, there's going to have to be something to keep players coming back season after season, and I just want to say that across Twisted Metal's 8-game history, there's a lot to work with. Recreating classic levels for deathmatch or reworking them to fit with some of the new game modes, cosmetics that reskin vehicles and drivers to look like previous versions, and a ton of returning vehicles means there's a pretty good backlog to pull from, in addition to whatever new ideas the team could bring to the table. The vehicles are the biggie, of course, and I'd be really interested to see how the team takes the cars from across the series and reworks them to fit into a team-oriented system, as well as writing storylines for new and returning drivers. With this style, you can bring back multiple iterations of the same vehicle from across the series and make them fit together. Picture the game launching with the classic squad car version of Outlaw driven by Carl Roberts, then down the line the SUV version can be added in, driven by Jamie, or having the classic Humvee version of Warthog, then adding in the station wagon on tank dreads, and even the Jeep from Small Brawl. The same can be said about multiple drivers sharing a vehicle from across different installments, like giving Dollface Darkside, then having Mr. Ash drive the tanker truck version of Minion from Twisted Metal Black, and classic Demon Minion can drive classic Tank Minion, have Agent Stone drive Crimson Fury, and put Agent Shepard in Death Warrant, and so on. Of course, a lot of names will have to change. I wouldn't want 2 Outlaws, 2 Minions, and 3 Warthogs listed on the same roster, but the vehicles can stay largely the same with a new name and drivers to fill out a growing roster post-launch. The Twisted Metal series has a lot to work with. An 8-game legacy spread across 17 years and a new show to hopefully revitalize the franchise means that there's so much that can be done. For both old-school fans who've been around since the PS1 days, and newcomers who may have never even had the chance to play these games. Even if you're not a fan of the ideas presented here, Twisted Metal has so much untapped potential that I really just want to see what a talented and passionate team could do given the opportunity. I said before that the show feels like it was made by fans, and it turned out better than I could have hoped because of it. I can't even imagine what a new game could be like with that kind of creative passion driving it. But what do you think? Could Twisted Metal survive in the current market? Do you have better ideas for what should be done for the franchise? Did you even like the show? I'd love to hear from you. And until next time, thanks for watching. Bye! Okay, I have no idea when I'm ever going to get the opportunity to talk about this again, but watching the show and replaying a bunch of the games has kind of reignited my creative passion, and I started writing up some homebrew rules for car combat in 5th edition. I literally just have no idea where I'm going to talk about that ever again. So, hey, if you ever want to play a car combat simulator for your tabletop RPG, let me know, and maybe I'll make a video talking about what I did for that.